Tell me, Jack, do you practice being pathetic, or does it just come naturally? The words sliced through the clinking glasses in shallow laughter in O'Malley's bar, and I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me, including hers, the one person I would have bled to protect from this kind of spectacle. My chest tightened, not from the whiskey I hadn't touched yet, but from the suffocating weight of humiliation pressing down in front of a crowd that smelled of beer foam and fried wings. I should tell you my name before you dismiss me as just another middle-aged fool losing face at a bar. Jack Mercer, 43, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, where I learned to work hard, fight harder, and never show weakness until tonight when the very thing I feared cracked open in public view. The man standing across from me wasn't a stranger. He was someone I trusted with my house keys and family dinners, his smirk stretching wider as if my pain was a trophy. My fists twitched at my sides, but I didn't swing, because I had something else, something no one in that room knew I carried, a card up my sleeve sharp enough to slice through the lies that had built this stage for my downfall. Jack, you really thought she was going to choose you? Another voice chimed in, mocking, and the ripple of laughter that followed felt like glass grinding against my ribs. My fiancée's silence, her refusal to meet my eyes, cut deeper than their words. And in that silence I understood something had already shifted. Loyalty had evaporated, leaving me standing bare while she hid in the shadows of my so-called friend's grin. I forced my lips into a smile, thin and bitter, because the one thing I knew in that moment was this: humiliation can be fuel, and tonight they handed me a full tank. The bar's neon lights flickered overhead, painting my shame in red and blue stripes across the floor, and in the reflection of a spilled drink pooling near my shoe, I swore I saw not defeat, but the glint of a man who wouldn't stay broken. The laughter hadn't stopped. It echoed in uneven waves, bouncing off the wooden walls plastered with college pennants and faded football posters, the kind of decor meant to comfort men who never outgrew their glory days. My hand grazed the edge of the bar, fingertips sticky with condensation from a half-empty pint someone left behind, and I wondered if anyone else noticed how quickly a crowd could transform. 1 minute strangers sharing pitchers, the next a jury of smirks waiting for the condemned to crumble. "Say something, Jack," he taunted, tilting his head like a coach daring a rookie to step onto the field he'd salted with traps. And for a heartbeat I almost gave him what he wanted, a flash of anger, an outburst, something to confirm the version of me he was selling. Instead, I inhaled the bitter scent of hops, let it steady my pulse, and said nothing, because silence sometimes cuts sharper than rage. My fiancée shifted uneasily, brushing her hair behind her ear in a nervous tick I used to find endearing, but now it was a proof she knew exactly what was coming and she wasn't brave enough to stop it. I caught her reflection in the glass fridge behind the bar, her lips trembling just enough to betray that this betrayal wasn't impulsive. It had been brewing like cheap beer left too long in the sun. "Look at him. Can't even defend himself," a woman's voice muttered from a nearby booth, and I clenched my jaw so tight I tasted iron. My mind split into two reels, one tracking every sound, every insult, every flicker of shame, the other quietly cataloging details I would need later. The timestamp glowing on the bar's digital clock, the way he'd leaned too close when he spoke, the phone he slipped back into his pocket as if the words themselves had been scripted. A small thing caught my eye then, a bowl of pretzels on the counter, stale and untouched, a reminder of every childhood party where you grabbed a handful only to find the salt had faded, the crunch gone, like promises dressed as permanence. I reached for one, chewing slowly, staring him down until his smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, and in that hesitation I felt the first thread of control sliding back into my hands. "Cat got your tongue, Jack?" He pressed, his voice loud enough to hush the jukebox mid-song, as if even the machine sensed it was time to lean in. I crunched another pretzel between my molars, slow and deliberate, and the sound seemed to echo louder than his words, a tiny rebellion that unnerved him more than a fist ever could. The bartender, a guy I'd known since high school football days, glanced between us with the uneasy half-smile of someone who wants to stay neutral, but knows the room is tilting. "Don't do this here," he muttered under his breath, but of course it was already happening, the air thick with the kind of tension that makes people lean closer rather than turn away. My fiancée finally spoke, her voice soft but slicing. "Jack, maybe we should just go." And the crowd fed on it like sharks catching the first scent of blood, whispers darting from table to table, none of them willing to look me in the eye. I laughed then, not the kind of laugh that warms a room, but the brittle kind you hear from a man standing on the edge of something irreversible. Go? I repeated, letting the word linger in the stale air. After all the effort he's put into this little performance? My so-called friend shifted his weight, his smirk reappearing as if my defiance gave him license to twist the knife. You see, folks, Jack's always been like this, quiet when it matters, loud when no one's listening. That's why she's with me now. Gasps rippled, some half hidden behind beer mugs, others blatant, and I caught the bartender's wince, the kind of silent apology a man makes when he can't step between loyalty and spectacle. My vision tunneled for a second, but instead of collapsing inward, it sharpened, every detail crystallizing, the glint of his watch catching neon light, her diamond ring he hadn't even bothered to hide, the chorus of text notifications pinging from a phone someone forgot to silence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the sticky bar, and whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "You should have checked twice before you sent those messages." His smirk faltered again, smaller this time like a candle flame in a draft, and though no one else caught it, I did. The first crack in his armor, the first sign that humiliation might not be mine to carry much longer. He caught the whisper. I saw it in the twitch of his jaw, but instead of recoiling, he leaned closer as though proximity might smother the weight of my words, his breath laced with bourbon cutting sharp against the barroom haze. And for a fleeting instant, I wondered if anyone else noticed how silence can shift a room faster than shouting ever could. What messages? He said too quickly, too defensively, and though the crowd's ears were dulled by beer and bravado, mine sharpened, catching the subtle panic buried in his tone. My fiancée Sand clutched her purse strapped tighter, knuckles blanching, and I recognized the gesture from every late-night argument she used to walk away from when I pressed for honesty. A habit of holding on to something as if fabric might anchor her to lies she couldn't admit. "Don't start inventing things, Jack," she muttered, but her eyes darted to his pocket before the words fully left her lips. A betrayal as small as a glance yet big enough to stain the air with confirmation. The bartender shifted, polishing the same glass twice, pretending not to see, while a group of college kids at the back recorded snippets on their phones, hoping drama would pay off in likes and shares, and I thought of how quickly private failures become public amusement in this era where every stumble is content. "Funny thing about texts," I said, keeping my voice steady, "they leave fingerprints, little ghosts in the cloud, even after you think you've deleted them." His grin returned, but it was taut now, rehearsed, a man clinging to a role in a play he no longer controlled, and I felt a pulse of grim satisfaction because, for the first time tonight, he was reacting to me instead of me to him. A man once told me trust is like glass. It doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks line by line until one day the weight becomes too much, and all you're left with are shards sharp enough to cut both hands. The crowd hushed again, some leaning forward, others retreating in discomfort, and I realized the stage he built for my humiliation was beginning to tilt beneath his own feet. He tried to laugh, but it cracked halfway through, a brittle sound that told me the room was no longer entirely his, and I seized that fracture the way a quarterback seizes a hole in the defense, pushing before it could close. "Don't act like you don't know," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to pierce the muffled chatter, and the nearest tables froze as though they'd stumbled into a scene they weren't sure they wanted to witness. My fiancé touched his arm then, subtle, almost invisible, but I caught it. The silent plea not to let this unravel, and the way his eyes flicked to hers, told me everything I needed. Guilt has a body language all its own. "Jack, this is beneath you," she whispered, but the tremor in her tone gave her away, and I felt an old ache mix with fresh fury, a reminder that I once trusted her laughter to soften the weight of the world, and now it was being bartered in exchange for his arrogance. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" he asked, louder now, trying to wrestle the crowd back onto his side, but the question itself was a misstep. Only guilty men demand specificity before the charges are laid. I leaned closer so only he could see the curve of my smile and murmured, "You already know." His pupils tightened, and for the first time all night he looked away, scanning the bar as though a hidden exit might save him. The bartender set down the glass he'd been polishing and muttered, "Jack, maybe take this outside." But I shook my head because I wanted every single person in that room to remember this moment the way they remembered their first heartbreak or their last championship game, vividly, permanently, with no room for revision. A thought surfaced then, half memory, half realization. The cheapest lies rot fastest, and what's left behind smells so foul it clings to anyone standing near. His facade was rotting now, and I could see people wrinkling their noses even if they didn't yet understand why. "You think you're clever," he spat, though the edge in his voice had dulled, replaced by the tremor of a man realizing the ground he stood on was thinner than ice in March, and that single wobble made my pulse steady for the first time all night. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the untouched pint the bartender had abandoned, lifted it halfway, then set it back down, a small performance of restraint that somehow made the silence heavier. The college kids in the corner had their phones angled shamelessly now, little red record dots burning like spotlights, and I wondered if he could feel how exposed he'd become, every twitch and blink preserved forever in the endless archive of the internet. My fiancée's phone buzzed inside her purse, muffled, but unmistakable, and when she flinched, I caught the bartender's eyes widen. He'd heard it too, the metallic chime of secrets straining against their leash. "Answer it," I said softly, not as a command but as an invitation, and the color drained from her face, draining him right along with her, because betrayal always echoes louder when it doubles back. She shook her head, whispering, "Not here." But that whisper was a confession dressed in hesitation, and the crowd heard it. You could feel the ripple of understanding pass through them like wind through cornfields back home. He slammed his palm on the bar, desperate to redirect, shouting, "This is ridiculous, Jack!" But the sound didn't carry weight anymore. It bounced hollow, like a drumskin stretched too thin. I leaned in, close enough for him to see the calm in my eyes, and said, "Ridiculous is thinking the truth stays buried just because you cover it with noise." His mouth opened, but no words came, and in that silence the room tilted fully, the audience that once cheered my humiliation now shifting toward him with the hungry curiosity people reserve for watching idols stumble. The pretzel bowl sat between us still, crumbs scattered, salt stuck to the wood, and I slid it slowly toward him, murmuring, "Go on, take one. Tastes just like the promises you made." He didn't move, and that stillness told me what the crowd was already beginning to sense. The performance was over, and the unraveling had only just begun. The silence around him wasn't empty. It pressed in like humidity before a thunderstorm, heavy, electric, waiting for something to break, and I let him feel the weight of it while I straightened my back and finally lifted the pint for a slow drink. The beer was flat bitter, but I swallowed anyway because bitterness is a flavor men my age know too well, and sometimes you need to taste it to remember what you'll never settle for again. "Jack, enough," my fiancée whispered, but her voice carried less authority than the fizz escaping from the bottom of the glass, and the way she avoided my eyes told everyone listening that the betrayal was already confessed, even if no one had said the words aloud. "You're embarrassing yourself," he tried again, softer this time, and I almost smiled at the irony. The same man who dragged me into the spotlight, now begging me to step out of it before the lights got too hot. I tilted my head, studying him like a chess player studies a pawn about to be sacrificed, and asked, "Tell me, when you texted her at midnight, did you use the same lines you used on me when you swore you had my back?" His throat tightened, Adam's apple jerking like a trapped animal, and though the crowd couldn't see the screen I'd glimpsed weeks ago, I carried that memory like a loaded weapon in my pocket. The bartender muttered something under his breath, maybe a prayer or maybe just a curse that his bar had become a coliseum. But no one moved to stop it. They were too far gone, hooked on the unraveling. A girl near the jukebox giggled nervously, then clapped her hand over her mouth when she realized the sound didn't belong, and even that tiny slip made him flinch. I leaned closer again, lowering my voice to a knife's edge. "Funny thing about receipts, they don't lie, even when people do." His face drained of color, and I knew in that moment he remembered the one I had. The overlooked detail he thought would never surface, the thin thread that was already tightening around his neck. He blinked fast, too fast, like a man trying to wash away the thought before it rooted. But panic doesn't rinse clean once it shows on the face, and the crowd caught it, their murmurs now shifting into something sharper curiosity seasoned with suspicion. "Receipts?" Someone asked aloud, a guy in a ball cap who leaned forward as if the word itself had weight, and I let it hang there, unclarified, because sometimes the shadow of evidence terrifies more than the evidence itself. My fiancée tried to interject, her tone brittle as glass. "Jack's just angry, he doesn't mean—" But I cut her off without raising my voice. "I mean every word, and you know it." Her jaw locked, lips quivering as though one wrong syllable might spill everything she tried to contain, and that half-second hesitation was enough to tip the jury of onlookers against her. He tried to salvage the moment, clapping his hands once, a hollow gesture meant to redirect attention. But it echoed strangely in the stillness, drawing more eyes instead of diverting them. "You're delusional," he muttered, softer now, aiming only for me, and I almost laughed at the cowardice in his lowered volume. "Am I?" I said, tilting my head toward the college kids with their phones raised like weapons. "Then you won't mind if the world decides for itself?" His lips parted, words forming then breaking apart before they could leave, and in that fracture I saw the truth. He was already imagining those screenshots resurfacing, already hearing the buzz of group chats dissecting his betrayal, already living inside the cage of his own exposure. I took another stale pretzel, bit down slowly, savoring the crunch as if it were punctuation, and thought about how promises rot when left out too long, how even salt loses its bite when ignored. "Some things," I said aloud, letting the bar hear me, "taste worse when they go stale." The bartender froze mid-wipe, the room leaned closer, and my fiancé's face flushed crimson because everyone understood the line wasn't about pretzels at all. He shifted back from the bar stool as if distance could dilute the tension, but the crowd pressed closer, closing ranks in that instinctive way people do when they sense blood in the water, and his space shrank even as he tried to carve it larger. "This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, but the line sounded like a cliché lifted from a bad sitcom, and a few people actually chuckled, the sound landing heavier on him than any accusation. My fiancée reached for his hand, desperate to tether herself to his unraveling, but I caught the gesture and said sharply, "Careful, you don't want to tie yourself to a sinking ship." The room hissed with a collective intake of breath, and I watched her fingers retreat as though burned. He tried again, voice cracking, "You have no proof." And that was the slip I'd been waiting for, because denial framed in those words isn't defense. It's confession disguised as defiance. I leaned in, my voice steady, deliberate. "Proof? Proof? I don't need to hand it to you. You already admitted you're afraid it exists." His mouth opened, then shut, like a man gasping in shallow water, and the silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the clink of a glass someone set down too hard in the back. The bartender finally spoke, voice low but firm. "Jack, maybe you should walk away before this turns into something uglier." I nodded slightly, but not in agreement, in acknowledgement, because I knew I wasn't done yet, not here, not tonight. A thought slipped through me then, unbidden but sharp. The cruelest thing about betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the moment you realize the story of your life has been rewritten without your permission. I swallowed hard, forcing the burn down my throat, then whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "Stories can be rewritten again." His face blanched, and the crowd, sensing an unseen weight in my words, shifted with the unease of people realizing the climax hadn't yet arrived. "Walk away?" I echoed the bartender's words, but twisted them, standing up from my stool so the scrape of wood against the floor cut through the murmurs. "No, I've been walking away my whole life, from paychecks that never stretched far enough, from bosses who promised promotions that vanished into smoke, from family dinners where I smiled through gritted teeth while people measured me against men like him." I jabbed a finger toward Jack, and the crowd stilled, sensing that I wasn't lashing out at random, but unearthing something larger, a ledger of old debts suddenly called due. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the oxygen. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering as if it were the trigger of a gun. "You think this is about texts?" I asked, turning the glow of the screen so the light caught his pale face. "It's not the screenshots that matter, it's the timestamps." A ripple went through the crowd because even those not paying close attention knew what timestamps meant. Evidence. Precision. A clock that couldn't lie even when people did. He lunged forward suddenly, voice breaking, "Stop, don't do this." And his desperation told the room more than any document could. My fiancée half rose from her chair, her breath catching, but I cut my eyes toward her and said softly, "Sit down. You've made enough choices already." The words landed harder than a shout, and she sank back, trembling. My heart thundered, but not from nerves, from clarity, from the cold surge of realizing every humiliation I'd swallowed, every smile I'd forced, had distilled into this moment where silence wasn't survival anymore, it was surrender, and surrender was dead. Jack whispered, You'll ruin everything. His lips barely moving, but I leaned so close he could feel the heat of my breath when I answered, No. You ruined everything the night you touched what was mine. The bar's air felt brittle, ready to shatter, and in the fragments I was about to release, I knew one truth would cut sharper than all the rest. I tapped the screen, and the bar's TV, usually reserved for ball games and highlight reels, flickered as my AirPlay linked, and suddenly the laughter and chatter bled into silence when the screen filled with the thread of messages, her name, his name, the late-night timestamps stacking like nails in a coffin. Don't, she gasped, her voice high, brittle, a sound too sharp to belong to the woman I once planned to build a life with. But the words had already bloomed across the room in blue and gray bubbles, ugly truths dressed in digital fonts. Jack shoved forward, hissing, You don't understand what this looks like. But his voice cracked under the weight of what everyone could now see. His promises written past midnight, her replies dripping with intimacy, jokes about me that twisted the knife deeper. The crowd didn't cheer or boo, they just stared wide-eyed, the same way people stare at a car wreck on the highway, horrified yet unable to look away. My pulse slowed, not sped, as if revenge had switched my body into some darker clarity, and I finally felt the edge of power tilt my way. A guy from my office muttered, Jesus, that's his fiancée. And the whisper spread like dry brush catching fire, feeding on itself. Jack tried to grab the remote from the bartender, but the man, sensing the theater of justice, yanked it away and muttered, Not tonight, buddy. I stepped closer, my voice steady. Do you remember the diner? Thanksgiving morning 2 years ago? He blinked, thrown, and I continued, You told me loyalty was the currency that kept men alive in this world. I guess you spent it all. He tried to speak, but the weight of his own hypocrisy smothered him. And in the silence that followed, I added what I'd been saving for this exact moment. The one twist they didn't see coming. This isn't just humiliation, it's termination. I pulled up the email on my phone, the digital paper trail showing he had funneled company funds into personal accounts to pay for their secret weekends. Gasps cut the air, heavier than booze, because now it wasn't just betrayal, it was a crime unraveling in real time. Jack lunged at me then, the kind of desperate movement a cornered animal makes when it finally realizes the trap wasn't just closing but already locked, but the crowd surged like a tide, pushing him back before he could reach me, their disgust stronger than any fists. My fiancée sobbed, mascara streaking down her face, but the room had already turned her into a ghost, their eyes sliding past her as if she were already gone. I raised my whiskey glass, the one I had been nursing all night, the same brand Jack and I used to drink together after late shifts, and I let the amber swirl catch the neon light as I said, low but clear enough to carry. The thing about whiskey, some people use it to toast brotherhood, others to wash down their betrayal. Tonight, it tastes like justice. Phones were everywhere now, screens glowing as hands shot up to capture the downfall, and within seconds this humiliation wasn't just local. It was viral, traveling faster than he could ever hope to run. Jack screamed something about lies, about setups, but I only had to tap one more time and the screen filled with his own digital signature on those wire transfers, undeniable proof of theft. The bartender muttered, You're done, pal, and it hit with more finality than any judge's gavel. I walked past him slowly, deliberately, brushing his shoulder just enough to make him flinch, and I set the whiskey glass down on the bar, leaving it behind like a symbol carved into memory. My fiancée tried to grab my arm, whispering, Please don't leave me like this. But I didn't even look at her. I just let her words fall away, already forgotten. The cops would be here soon. I'd timed it with a quiet phone call earlier, a detail no one knew about, and the flashing reds outside were my silent confirmation. As they dragged him out, the crowd buzzing in disbelief, I finally felt the crushing weight I had carried for months lift from my chest. And yet what surprised me wasn't triumph, it was clarity, the raw kind that only comes when the last illusion shatters. I turned to the room, to no one in particular, and said, People think betrayal destroys you, but really it builds you a mirror. And in that mirror, you decide whether to drown in bitterness or rise in fire. Then I walked into the cold night air, the hum of the city swallowing me whole, knowing scars would remain, but also knowing I had carved something sharper. Proof that even in ruin, dignity can be reclaimed, and that sometimes revenge isn't about winning, it's about making sure the truth can ever be buried again. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us share more true stories like this.